ambitious flight time this afternoon to arrive in the same place we'll start from, but weaving in and out of some other traditions that essentially are saying the same thing. Something the Dalai Lama has said is he doesn't understand why Westerners are coming to the East to try to be Buddhist when they have perfectly good religions of their own. All they need to do is live them. There's a stirring scene, maybe we could call it, at the end of the Pali Canon, towards the end of the Buddha's, Siddhartha Gautama's 40 plus years traveling and teaching. And he's walking with his monks through a forest, and he grabs a handful of leaves, and he says, "Monks, what is greater? The leaves of the forest or the leaves in my hand?" One of his monks replies, "Oh great sir, the leaves of the forest are greater than the leaves in your hand." And he responds, "So too, what I have learned and what I have chosen to teach, as it was in the beginning, so it is now. I teach suffering and the cessation of suffering." So the Buddha didn't say much about much. He didn't talk about what's the best government system, what's the best economic system. He didn't weigh in on whether gay marriage was moral or immoral. He taught essentially the same simple things in, as it's been counted, 40,000 different ways. Because he was always aware of his listeners. And he was aware of the most palpable and tangible way to impart the truths he embodied to them. Even he said of everything he taught that it was merely a raft for crossing the river, and you would be very foolish to try to carry that raft into the next stage. It would just weigh you down. Because he knew it doesn't really matter what he knew, because people had to uncover what they know for themselves for it to have any meaning. It's interesting, Karuna has many Buddha statues, which likely the Buddha would ask us to put away. Towards the end of his life, where he was to be buried, his followers had ambitious plans to build a great statue of him. And he said, "Why don't you plant a tree instead?" He had no care for fame or fortune. He taught suffering and the end of suffering. And we continue endeavoring to walk in those footsteps today. When we think about realized beings, the Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Mahavira, Rumi, I would certainly include Socrates as a mystic if we study his life. They have different personas, personalities. They inhabit, but there's a central commonality between them. None of the mentioned people seem to care if they lived or died. All of them seem to rather die than take actions that were out of alignment with their values and their virtues. And most of the aforementioned people did die, were put to death by other people because of the threat they posed to the status quo. All of them seem to naturally be loving towards all beings. And all of them, out of compassion for others, had a desire to impart the truths they had uncovered on their paths in a way that would be useful to us. So we can use words like Bodhichitta, these fancy Sanskrit words, but the words mean nothing. What matters is the shape of our being, the shape of our consciousness, how it walks through the world, how it confronts difficulties in our lives. In C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity, he says, it's not that if you're good, God sends you to heaven, and if you're bad, God sends you to hell. It's that our entire lives we're crafting our soul into a heavenly or a hellish being. And at the end of our earthly lives, depending on the shape of our soul, depending on how we formed ourselves, is where we go, which in a Buddhist perspective would be being reborn into more suffering than the last lifetime. So Bodhichitta simply means the awakening mind, the mind that dedicates its living for what it sees as the highest purposes and potentials of human life, which always, in all the traditions, brings us back into compassion. Through right intention, the outward actions stem from the inward shape of our soul. So sometimes it can seem quite mundane what we're doing here. Is this really doing anything? We ask in a moment. But if we look at it this way, if we see our lives as a room, 4 walls, 2 cans of paint, 1 black, 1 white. Every day we enter that room of our lives and we either put a black brush stroke or a white brush stroke. And the cumulative effect of that is we end up with a mostly white or completely white or mostly black or completely black or a zebra-colored room, depending on what seems like small, trivial moments that add up to a certain totality. Like the analogy we used on day 1 of the bucket that we fill with rocks. A little rock every day. We'll notice no discernible weight in the bucket, but there'll come a day, unless we're very strong, where we can't even lift the bucket. So we can take great heart in our practice and in our lives that when we feel like, I need a change right now, and oh no, all this stuff is out of balance, that's just the mind bringing us down, and we can smile at that thought, say, interesting, let it go, and endeavor to do what we can. Some days maybe just making our bed one morning will lead to a better day than yesterday. So if we can dedicate every tomorrow, every new day, to bringing about what is ultimately going to bring us sustaining happiness, then we will arrive. We may not know when it was that we arrived or how we really got there. But the work we're doing of working through frustrations, treating ourselves kindly, compassionately, finding the mind wandering and bringing it back again and again and again, is a tried and true method, not to take on what this person said, what the Buddha said, what Muhammad said, what Jesus said, but to peel off the layers of all the ideas that are not our own. And the Buddhist perspective has a confidence that if we truly see into the nature of things, we'll begin to see certain commonalities, that we can't be unkind to one person and kind to this person. We can't curry favorites. Again, it doesn't mean we become weaklings and pushovers who stand for nothing and let others take advantage of us, manipulate us, harass us, and abuse us. Absolutely not. It means we stand up for ourselves, the way we stand up for others, the way we stand up for our values, the way we endeavor day after day to employ our virtues in our lives. And if we can't maintain a concentrated focus on even our breath, we will have difficulty implementing our values within our lives. We'll have difficulties rising to the occasion when the occasion is called for. So bodhicitta is a joyful sentiment that looks at our future time on earth very positively. Not the sort of, we can call it toxic positivity that puts a smile on its face while repressing and denying the sorrows, but the sort of positive joy that only comes from having walked through those painful places, having openly and honestly faced ourselves, and having that willingness to see whatever is there, having that commitment to come alive, to make the most of things, to make the best of things, whatever things are at play within our lives. From the Buddhist perspective, from the Tibetans, Lamrim is called the step-by-step path, which means the graduated path. And if, like a scientist, we were to replicate the Buddha's experiment, after enough time, we would get the same result. Enlightenment, whatever that means. The mere wanting it will keep us from getting it. This is the paradox we face. But if we see the world as it is, if we see the suffering of the world, and if we see that our best intentions still go awry sometimes, that we still contribute to the collective pain at times, then that sight will bring us to wanting enlightenment, whatever it is, not for our own benefit, but because we will understand from our own experiential knowledge that only by achieving it will we be of most service to others. So bodhicitta wants enlightenment, not for us, but for the benefit of others. And the ego goes crying to the corner because it thinks it's going to lose everything, but the higher self knows it's going to gain everything. Buddhism can sometimes be called pessimistic. It's always focused on death and suffering, dukkha and pain. But we can look at it this way. There's neither a pessimistic nor optimistic viewpoint, but a realistic one. if we were to go and visit a doctor, so we had an illness, and we saw 3 doctors. And the first one was overly optimistic and said, "You're fine, there's nothing wrong with you." Who would likely continue to get worse, because he wasn't being realistic, he was being overly optimistic. The pessimistic doctor might say, "Oh, you're doomed. This thing, there's nothing we can do, it's incurable." Equally unhelpful. But the skilled doctor is able to see the underlying cause of the symptoms, treat the underlying causes, and cure the condition. This is the prescription we find in Buddhism, but if we look deeply into the major world religions, they're all saying essentially the same thing. It's been said, all the mystics of the world's great religion are smiling at each other with nothing to say. There's no such thing as a spiritual argument. Maybe a religious argument. But part of humbleness and humility, non-grasping, non-clinging to our viewpoint, is simply saying, who's to say? This feels like my path. This feels like the right one for me. But who am I to tell others what is right for them? Only they can discover that for themselves. The 5 hindrances, as they're called on the path. Lustful desires, which in this context is not just having to do with sexuality, but all of our unbounded cravings. That it's not to say from this perspective you can't enjoy a glass of wine and things like this. But we enjoy things as they are without clinging to them, without putting them in a place that interferes with our life being lived as best as we can. Ill will, hatred, or anger. 3rd hindrance is torpor or languor, laziness. The 4th hindrance is restlessness or worry. The 5th is skeptical doubts. If we are skeptical to the point that we don't believe in the teachings as they're being handed to us, we certainly won't be able to muster the courage to continue on the path when it becomes difficult. Our doubts can grow to the point where they tell us a story that allows us to leave these things. The 7 factors of enlightenment. Mindfulness. Mindfulness, expanding our awareness and contracting our judgments of what we're aware of. Investigation. In the yogic tradition, this is called svadhyaya, self-study. So, studying, reading texts, joining groups, discussions, YouTube videos. These are factors that contribute to our growth. The 3rd factor of enlightenment is the energy to work with determination to the end. The 4th is joy, which in this context is the contrary to pessimism. The 5th is relaxation of body and mind. It's this subtle balance between effort and effortlessness. That at a certain point we need to lighten up and relax and trust and know that we got this without letting all these worries contract our mind and body. The 6th factor is concentration. We're certainly developing a greater concentration over these 3 days. And the 7th is equanimity, to be able to face life in all of its vicissitudes with a calm mind. we're developing equanimity when we smile at whatever thoughts comes, when we don't judge it as good or bad, when we see even the painful meditations, the difficult ones, as contributing to our growth. Because I think one of the pitfalls many meditators are making these days is they're trying to bring about these sublime states. Instead, when they come, we notice them, we enjoy them, but then we don't enter our next sitting as, oh, I want that to happen again. What did I do last time? How do I get that again? Because then we turn the very practice that's designed to lead us away from craving and desire into a sensation game, endeavoring to bring about certain states that feel great, instead of enjoying them when they come, having equanimity when unpleasant states come. So I'm going to read a little bit from C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. I don't know that he covers this particular issue of pride in a way that is better or worse than many others. But I think it's important to expand out, to look to the other traditions, not to see what they don't have, but what they do have. To see that at the heart of all the traditions is a call to love, is a call to compassion, and pride and jealousy. These are some of the poisons from the Buddhist perspective, and it's understood equally within the Christian perspective. And he talks about man and men, and sometimes I try to switch up the pronouns to make it genderless, but we'll just have to bear with it this time. There is one vice of which no man in the world is free, which everyone in the world loathes when he sees it in someone else, and of which hardly any people ever imagine that they are guilty themselves of. I have heard people admit that they are bad-tempered, or that they cannot keep their heads about girls or drink, or even that they are coward. There is no fault which makes a man more unpopular, and no fault which we are more unconscious of in ourselves. And the more we have it ourselves, the more we dislike it in others. The vice I'm talking about is pride or self-conceit. And the virtue opposite it in Christian morals is called humility. According to Christian teachers, the essential vice, the utmost evil, is pride. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. Does this seem to you exaggerated? If so, think it over. I pointed out a moment ago that the more pride one had, the more one disliked pride in others. In fact, if you want to find out how proud you are, the easiest way is to ask yourself, how much do I dislike it when other people snub me, or refuse to take any notice of me, or shove their oar in, or patronize me, or show off? The point is that each person's pride is in competition with everyone else's pride. It is because I wanted to be the big noise at the party that I am so annoyed at someone else being the big noise. Two of a trade never agree. Now what you want to get clear is that pride is essentially competitive, is competitive by its nature, while the other vices are competitive only, so to speak, by accident. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. We say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good-looking, but they are not. They are proud of being richer or cleverer or better-looking than others. If everyone else became equally rich or clever or good-looking, there would be nothing to be proud about. It is the comparison that makes you proud, the pleasure of being above the rest. Once the element of competition has gone, pride has gone. That is why I say that pride is competitive in a way the other vices are not. The sexual impulse may drive two men in competition if they both want the same woman, but that is only by accident. They might just as likely have wanted two different women. But a proud man will take your woman from you, not because he wants her, but just to prove to himself that he is better. Greed may drive men into competition if there is not enough to go around. But the proud man, even when he has got more than he can possibly want, will try to still get more just to assert his power. Nearly all those evils in the world which people put down to greed or selfishness are really far more the result of pride. Pleasure in being praised is not pride. The child who is patted on the back for doing a lesson well, the woman whose beauty is praised by her lover, the soul saved to whom Christ says, "Well done," are pleased and ought to be. For here the pleasure lies not in what you are, but in the fact that you have pleased someone you wanted, and rightly wanted to please. We must not think pride is something God forbids because he is offended at it, or that humility is something he demands as due to his own dignity, as if God himself was proud. He is not in the least worried about his dignity. The point is, he wants you to know him, wants to give you himself. And he and you are two things of such a kind that if you really get into any kind of touch with him, you will, in fact, be humble, delightedly humble, feeling the infinite release of having for once got rid of all the silly nonsense about your own dignity, which has made you restless and unhappy all your life. So it's easy to see how the megalomaniac, the egomaniac, is obsessed with his or herself. But it's sometimes more difficult to see that people who are self-loathing, people that are self-deprecating, are equally obsessed with themselves. It's just that the energy is going in the opposite direction. Whereas the megalomaniac thinks, I am so great, I'm so amazing. The self-deprecating person is constantly thinking about how bad they are, how unworthy they are. So both are a form of self-grasping. If we turn to the yogic tradition, from the Yoga Sutras, there are the yamas and the niyamas, or the 5 restraints, and the 5 observances. There's an 8-fold path in Buddhism, and there's an 8-limbed tree in the yogic tradition. The 8 states of unfoldment for attaining the goals of yoga are religious restraints, spiritual observances, meditative postures, regulation of life force, sense withdrawal, concentration, meditation, contemplation. The 5 restraints in the yogic tradition are restraints from injuring, lying, stealing, impurity, and grief. And they are often indicated as positive actions: non-injury, non-lying, non-theft, non-impurity, non-greed. This means that we are to not only restrain from injury, but a positive action of non-injury is also to be lived. Restraint is the great vow, which is to be always observed. No yogi is exempt because of time, place, circumstance, or station in life. And what are the results of the restraints? On being established in non-injury, all hostile thoughts are relinquished by others when they come into your presence. This is essentially ahimsa, which exists in both the yogic and Buddhist traditions, where this is the Christian: love your neighbor as yourself, love those who hate you. On being established in non-lying, words acquire the power of fruition. You can look from the 4 agreements, being impeccable with our word, the 10 commandments, do not lie, the 8-fold path, the right speech. On being established in non-theft, wealth presents itself. On being established in non-impurity, vigor of body and mind is obtained. So if we're constantly doing things that we know in our heart is not good for us, we are pitting our mind against itself, and that's so exhausting. On being established in non-greed, non-grasping in the yogic tradition, the mind obtains knowledge of the past and future. The 5 observances in yoga are purification. We're engaging in purification of body and mind in our practice. Contentment, so being happy. Appreciative joy, as it is in the Buddhist tradition. Austerity, translated also as discipline. So we're engaging in this when we engage in our seated practice. Studying sacred texts and mantras. On being established in purification, you attain the protectiveness of your own vehicle, the body, and detachment from infatuation with superficial living. I believe this story comes from Yogananda. So there's a yoga ashram, and a guy comes and visits, and he's invited to come practice yoga. And he says, "Oh, I can't practice yoga." Yogananda says, "Why not?" He says, "Oh, I like to drink, I like to smoke, I like to gamble, and I like to womanize." And Yogananda says, "Well, what's the problem? You can still practice yoga." He says, "Really? You mean I can abuse alcohol, smoke, gamble, womanize, and still practice yoga?" And Yogananda says, "Of course. But I can't promise you, as you continue on the yogic path, that you'll continue to want to do these things. So piece by piece, in the body and the mind's purification, we no longer desire those things that are counterfeit coins that may buy us a moment's pleasure but then drag us for days like a broken man behind a farting camel. By being established in contentment, you acquire unsurpassed happiness. By being established in austerity or discipline, you obtain completeness of mental and spiritual energies. By being established in repeated contemplative study and meditative chanting, you reach communion with the ultimate reality. We'll read 2 short chapters from Rays of the One Light from Swami Kriyananda, one of Yogananda's students. And these are from short radio addresses he did. He fused the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible. It's in times where so many have dug their feet in the ground and are saying, my way is the way. It's refreshing when instead of looking for what other viewpoints don't have, what they do have, rejoicing in our common causes for virtue rather than nitpicking and finding reasons to aggrandize our own viewpoint at the diminishment of someone else's. Ego, friend or foe. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. Jesus Christ begins his Beatitudes with these words: Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. To be poor in spirit in such a way as to merit the kingdom of heaven doesn't mean to be poor-spirited. Rather, it means to see oneself as owning nothing, since all belongs to God, for all is a manifestation of his consciousness. St. John of the Cross wrote, if you would own everything, seek to own nothing. That which the ego relinquishes, offering it up to soul consciousness, is reclaimed forever in cosmic consciousness. Nothing is ever lost. Paramahansa Yogananda tells the story in Autobiography of a Yogi of the levitating saint, Baduri Mahasaya. Master, said a disciple of this saint once ardently, you are wonderful. You have renounced riches and comforts to seek God and teach us wisdom. It was well known that Baduri Mahasaya had forsaken great family wealth in his early childhood, when single-mindedly he entered the yogic path. You are reversing the case. The saint's face held mild rebuke. I have left a few paltry rupees, a few petty pleasures, for a cosmic empire of endless bliss. How then have I denied myself anything? I know the joy of sharing the treasure. Is that a sacrifice? The short-sighted worldly folk are verily the real renunciants. They relinquish an unparalleled divine possession for a poor handful of earthly toys. The Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter states, all things are everywhere by nature wrought in interaction of the qualities. The fool, cheated by self, thinks, this I did, and that I wrought. But ah, thou strong-armed prince, a better lessoned mind, knowing the play of visible things within the world of sense, and how the qualities must qualify, standeth aloof even from his acts. As it is in the Tao Te Ching, do your work and then step back. The only path to serenity. As it is in the Bhagavad Gita, we do our duties. We show up fully and joyfully for what's required of us. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita tells Arjuna that he cannot run away from the battlefield because rendering his duty is important in life. So how much more joyfully, more relaxed, more lighthearted can we do our work when we simply try to do the best we can, and then we don't worry about what comes of it. When we're always worried about the results, will my business fail or succeed? Will this third date lead to a partner? Then we're constantly engaging in stressful things that we can't control. What we can control or endeavor to shift is our perspective. A simple 30-second consecration of our day, every day, changes things. When we call to God, the universe, whatever we source, our higher self, when we surrender what we think we want to be open to receiving what we truly need, doors will open. The impossible becomes possible. And we'll end up in peace, equanimous, joyful, happy, motivated, determined, willing. And we'll play a much larger game. So that if we are dealing with an unreasonable person, instead of getting agitated at their unreasonableness, blaming them, telling them things that they're not yet ready to hear, we see our work in the interaction as planting seeds. We don't try to change them in that instance or shout at them or become angry, but we say to ourselves, what can I do in this situation that might help them, that might relieve them when they're suffering? Shantideva, an 11th century Tibetan, writes in his guide to the Bodhisattva way of living that if you can solve your problems, why worry? And if you can't solve your problems, why worry? If you can solve your problems, why worry? And if you can't solve your problems, why worry? So often we waste so much mental energy worrying about things that either we're going to solve when the time comes or not. And if we have the confidence that we are in integrity with our values, that we are strong with our boundaries, that we are able to express our needs, when we engage in a blameless way of living, we don't have to worry. We'll read briefly from that work. The chapter on patience. Whatever wholesome deeds, such as venerating the Buddhas and generosity, that have been amassed over 1,000 eons, will all be destroyed in one moment of anger. There is no transgression like hatred, and no fortitude like patience. Thus I should strive in various ways to meditate on patience. My mind will not experience peace if it fosters painful thoughts of hatred. I shall find no joy or happiness until I sleep. Unable to sleep, I shall feel unsettled. By hatred, friends and relatives are disheartened. Though drawn by my generosity, they will not trust me. In brief, there is nobody who lives happily with anger. Hence, the enemy, anger, creates suffering such as these. But whoever assiduously overcomes it finds happiness now and hereafter. Having found its fuel of mental unhappiness in the prevention of what I wish for, and in doing what I do not want, hatred increases and then destroys me. Therefore, I should totally eradicate the fuel of this enemy. For this enemy has no other function than that of causing me harm. Whatever befalls me, I shall not disturb my mental joy. For having been made unhappy, I shall not accomplish what I wish, and my virtues will decline. Why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? For myself and for my friends, I want no suffering, no disrespect, no harsh words, and nothing unpleasant. But for my enemies, it is the opposite. The cause of happiness sometimes occurs, but the causes for suffering are frequent. Without suffering, there is no renunciation. Therefore, mind, you should stand firm. But jumping off that theme of renunciation, we'll read a little bit more from Freedom Through Understanding, from Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. This story illustrates well. It's not what we do, but how we do it, why we do it, that really counts. There's a story about the great Tibetan yogi Drong Trungpa meeting an old man who was trying to practice Dharma. The old man was circumambulating a temple, thinking he was practicing Dharma. But the great yogi Drong Trungpa said to him, "You going around the temple is good, but wouldn't it be better if you practiced Dharma?" The old man thought that by practicing Dharma, the yogi must mean reading Dharma texts. So he stopped going around the temple and instead started reading texts. When Drong Trungpa saw him next, he said, "Reading texts is good, but wouldn't it be better if you practiced Dharma?" So the old man thought, if circumambulating and reading texts aren't practicing Dharma, the yogi must mean he should meditate, and started doing that. When, after some time, Drong Trungpa saw him sitting cross-legged, he said, "Meditation is very good, but wouldn't it be better if you practiced Dharma?" At this point, the old man was somewhat confused and irritated, and exclaimed to Drong Trungpa, "Practice Dharma? Practice Dharma? What do you mean, practice Dharma?" "Renounce this life," the yogi replied. What did the great yogi Drong Trungpa mean by renounce this life? He meant we should renounce suffering. which means renouncing the worst of all sufferings, the delusions, ignorance, attachment, anger, pride, jealousy, and so forth. All the negative minds that are the root of suffering. This is what practicing Dharma really means. Facing the root of sufferings, the delusions. So no matter what religion people follow, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, or any other, as long as their practice diminishes and destroys the root of suffering, that is the real Dharma. That is the actual path that brings true happiness, everlasting happiness. So it's extremely important that whatever we do, whatever meditation we practice, whatever religious actions we engage in, we use it to destroy the root of unhappiness, suffering. That's the most important thing to concentrate on. So we often think of renunciation as giving up things. That to be renounced, we have to give up what we like. But we can also see it as renouncing holding back. So often we're so worried about what other people think that we're afraid to shine as brightly as we may. Because what will they think? What will they think if I'm laughing, dancing? As Marianne Williams says, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. This is Lama Suryaya Dasa's take on renunciation. Renunciation is a time-honored way of working on oneself. The Buddha himself is probably the best-known example of renunciation. The Buddha, like other seekers of his time, left his homeland in order to meditate in dense jungles and blazing deserts. But what does the word renunciation realistically mean today in the modern context of Buddhism? We today are far more socially mobile. Phones, faxes, beepers, and the internet have made almost everyone reachable, no matter where we are. How can we leave our homeland now that our homeland has become the planet itself? Do we really have to turn our backs on family, friends, and work in order to practice Dharma? I don't think so. Renunciation doesn't mean walking away from our responsibilities and loved ones. It does mean abandoning our intense emotional attachments and compulsive preoccupations. Trungpa Rinpoche said, usually we think of renunciation as celibacy, poverty, obedience, shaving your head, going off somewhere and leaving everything behind. He then gave a wider tantric interpretation of renunciation. Renunciation means to let go of holding back. In Tibet, the term renunciation did not imply a sacrifice or any notion of penance. Instead, it meant the relief of finally dropping and getting rid of excess baggage through an arising of inner certainty about the illusory nature of created things. If we get even the smallest glimpse of liberation and what it means to experience freedom from want, we see where our happiness truly lies. This is the arising of inner certainty. When that occurs, we begin to renounce and give up the unfulfilling thoughts and behaviors that create negative karma. Renunciation refers to the opening of the tight fist of grasping and relinquishing our weighty burden of accumulated excess baggage. The heart of renunciation implies allowing rather than controlling. It requires letting go of that which is negative and harmful while opening up to sanity and wholeness. The question is, can we let go of holding back? Can we relinquish our fears and defenses? Can we forgive? Can we surrender and learn to better accept things as they are? Typically, this is accomplished in small, gradual steps. We grow up and we adopt a more mature attitude. When we do this, we leave the homeland of our childhood. We give up our childish ways. We depart from the nest of our family of origin and free ourselves from frozen behaviors. We stop telling ourselves stories. We stop spinning fantasies. We're all carting heavy baggage that is not helping us get to where we want to go or do what we want to do. Once we realize that we no longer need this baggage, we can relinquish it. Once we have inner certainty, we can leave our old habits and negativities behind.